Charles Oliveria is actively looking for a rematch against the champ, Islam Makhachev, later this year. He said when they fought in Abu Dhabi last year that it was just the result of a bad night at the office. He said, and I quote, "With all due respect, I had 10 minutes off on a bad night. I wouldn't change anything to fight Islam Makhachev. This fight will happen again. Be sure of that. This fight will happen. I will fight in either April or May, no matter who that is. And God will bless me with a win. And I will have my rematch with Islam Makhachev by the end of the year." Now, look, listen, for me, I want to see him have another go at Islam Makhachev. Not simply because, I'm a fan of his, because he deserves it. The rise of Charles Oliveria, that run that he went on at lightweight, 11 wins in a row with 10 finishes, was one of the best that we have seen in the UFC. But call it what you will. A bad night at the office, lost to the better man, whatever you want to call it, he lost the belt. And he lost it in pretty devastating fashion, let's be honest. Islam came in, by far the better person on that night, hurt him on the feet, dropped him on a couple of occasions, and then beat him at his own game. Tapped him out, submitted him, made everybody want to start calling him a quitter again, because that was the reputation that Oliveira had at 145 when he had those terrible weight cuts. But he put that to bed. The man's a warrior. That's what made him so exciting. I was all over him. I was all over his nuts, right? I was the biggest Charles Oliveira fan ever because he was sensational, but he was beat by the better man. Now, when you're a champion, that is what makes a champion different from other fighters. What am I saying? Well, you have to be able to go out there, and when everything isn't perfect, when the circumstances aren't in your favor, when you have distractions, when you aren't feeling too great, when you have a off night, as Charles put it, you've still got to be able to beat the number one contender. You've still got to be able to beat the best fighters on the planet and remain being the champion. That's what Anderson Silva was able to do. That's what George St. Pierre was able to do. That's what all these greats throughout history have been able to do. You're telling me they didn't have a bad night? You're telling me everything wasn't perfect in training camp? You're telling me sometimes they didn't have an injury? They did, but they were still able to get the job done. And that's what makes them so remarkable. However, listen, I'm a fan of Charles Oliveira. I'm a fan of Islam Makhachev. I want to see this fight go down again. But Oliveira said he needs to get one more win first. And who's that going to be against? Well, it's going to be Beneil Dariush. I don't know that for a fact, but I spoke to Beneil Dariush last week, and he seems to think that that's the fight that he's going to get. And I got to be honest, for Beneil Dariush, a man that is somewhat looked over, but he's a ferocious fighter and technically brilliant, that's the perfect fight. Because for Beneil, it will be the breakout fight over a former champion that everyone loves. And everyone does love Charles Oliveira, my word. There was footage of him in Brazil at the weekend being swarmed. It was like Michael Jackson or Elvis Presley or Jake Paul was walking through and people were just swarming him like crazy. And the fact he didn't have security was mind-blowing. He's so popular right now. But to get a title fight, he needs a good win. Because he was beaten soundly in that fight. If it was a razor-close back and forth battle, then fair enough, maybe an instant rematch. But Islam dominated him. And we do sometimes have a bad night at the office. I've been there myself. So he needs a big win. Beneil Dariush is perfect for both men. Beneil wins, he gets that big signature victory, and he gets to fight for the belt. If Charles Oliveira wins, well, guess what? We are back in style, and he's fighting for that belt again. And I tell you what, if Islam can get through Alexander Volkanovski in Perth, Australia, I mean, who else is there to challenge him? I mean, let's be honest. I mean, I don't know. I mean, if you look at Charles Oliveira, the people that he beat, was unbelievable. Yeah, Islam. But before that, Justin Gaethje, Dustin Poirier, Michael Chandler, Tony Ferguson. Them four there, they were like the biggest stars of the lightweight, absence of a Conor McGregor. But Gaethje, Poirier, Chandler, stopped them all. Finished them all. Won with punches, knocked out Chandler, choked out Gaethje and Dustin Poirier. So the man's action personified. You want to see this fight? Beneil Dariush versus Charles Oliveira makes all the sense in the world, right? All the sense in the world, and the winner gets to fight Islam. Now, as we know, at the weekend, we just had a fight called UFC 283, some sensational fights, and Charles Oliveria was offered a fight on that and he turned it down. In fact, there was a rumor that he was actually offered to fight Islam Makhachev in a rematch and he turned it down. And I understand why, because his schedule was absolutely ridiculous and he needed a break. The pressure that comes with being the champion, not to mention the physical preparation, the physical tiredness, you know what I mean, going through all those training camps. But since 2020 or 2021, he had 4 fights, 2 in 21, 2 in 2022, 5-round fights, preparing for title fights, mentally taxing, physically taxing, and a lot of pressure. So he wanted to take a little bit of time off, and I understand that. But he addressed that. He was the guest fighter at the weigh-ins. He was speaking to the crowd, and he said, there's no point coming in Thursday and not thinking with the head, to think with the heart. If I were to think with my heart, I would have definitely been a part of this card. I was offered a fight, and I thought about it quite a lot. But the timing is fighting in May and fighting for the title in Sao Paulo by the end of the year. Let's make it happen. He said we have to aim high, maybe a fight in the United States first in May, but then come back to fighting in Brazil by the end of the year in Sao Paulo. If it's there, that's even better. And hopefully that will be for the belt. So Charles Oliveira certainly got his sights on the belt again, and rightly so. Islam Makhachev, in his mind, is going to defeat Alexander Volkanovski. That's not a given. DC says that if Volkanovski was to beat Islam, it will be the biggest upset in the history of the UFC. An outlandish comment. I get his point. He's a friend of Islam and he knows how good he is. But you can't underestimate Alexander Volkanovski like that. Certainly not in his home territory. This is taking place in Australia. Volkanovski's bloody good. But let's just imagine that Volkanovski doesn't get the job done, right? Islam reigns supreme and Charles gets through Beneil. The rematch will be sensational. But will it be any different? If we speak to Charles and we listen to him, it was a bad night at the office. If you ask Islam, anyone in his team or anyone that supports him, they will say, of course, what do you mean bad night at the office? That sounds like an excuse. Okay, and we all have excuses. We all have reasons. But ultimately, it's what you do inside the octagon. Islam was the better man. How would a rematch go down? Islam beat him on the feet, dropped him, was sensational. Now, fair enough, Charles Oliveira does get dropped in his fights, but then finds a way to win. That's what makes them so successful. But lately, people weren't following him down to the ground. But Islam's like, brother, this is my world. He loves to go down to the ground. He loves to choke people out and use the sambo, the jiu-jitsu, the wrestling. So he went down there and he got the tap out, right? Which was kind of adding insult to injury for Charles Oliveira, because that's what he does. That's his world. He's the man with the most submissions in the history of the UFC, which is something for him as a jiu-jitsu practitioner to be very, very proud of course. What a record that is. You know what I mean? All the great jiu-jitsu players we've had, Damian Maia, Hoist Gracie. I mean, the list goes on. The Nogueira brothers. I mean, the list goes on. Jake Shields, for him to have the most is amazing. But Islam Makhachev is no joke. But when that rematch happens, what do you think? Who do you think wins? And do you think it will happen? Do you think Charles can get through Beneil? Do we think Islam can get through Volkanovski? I don't know. I don't know if Charles can get through Beneil, to be honest. I don't know if Beneil can get through Charles. That's how great this division is. I mean, it really is sensational, the lightweight division right now. And another thing that Beneil Dariush said when I spoke to him last week, and if you haven't seen it, that full interview is on the Believe You Me podcast, the episode we did last week, so check it out. Beneil said that the lightweight division from 5 to 15, or it might have been from 10 to 15, they're harder fights than the top 5. The top 5 obviously is Islam, Charles, Beneil, Justin, Dustin, Chandler. He said the guys in the top 5 to 15 are way harder. Talking about Guram Kutateladze, Arman Sarukin, Mateusz Gamrot, Jalen Turner. Who else? I mean, the list goes on. Lightweight is absolutely ridiculously stacked. So who will reign supreme this time next year? There's a good feeling that it might be Islam Makhachev still. But if you speak to Charles Oliveira, it was a bad night at the office and he is taking that belt back. And I wish him nothing but the best and nothing but success. Still, there it is. Me musing. A few thoughts on the lightweight division. Let me know what you think. Who will be the champ this time next year? What do you say? Anyway, you guys take care. All the best.